The stench hit the security guards first. 23 days of takeout containers, unwashed clothes, and despair had turned the corner office of Rossetti Industries into something that belonged in a landfill rather than a Manhattan skyscraper. Antonio Rossetti, once photographed on magazine covers as one of America's most eligible bachelors, now sat hunched over his mahogany desk in a wrinkled shirt that hadn't been changed in a week. His beard had grown wild and unkempt, his eyes were bloodshot from staring at computer screens and legal documents, and his breath could knock out a horse at 50 paces. Empty wine bottles lined his windowsill like soldiers, and pizza boxes were stacked so high they blocked his view of Central Park. The billionaire had barricaded himself inside his executive suite, refusing to let anyone enter, refusing all help, refusing to even acknowledge that the outside world existed. His ex-wife's lawyers were calling every hour. His board members were threatening to remove him. His mother was flying in from Italy. But Antonio just sat there, drowning in his own misery, convinced that his life was over and that no one could possibly understand the depth of his pain. Have you ever felt so broken that you pushed away everyone trying to help you? What would it take for someone to break through those walls you built around your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories that will touch your soul. Antonio Rossetti pressed his back against the mahogany door of his corner office, sliding the deadbolt with a click that seemed to echo through his soul. The sound of his assistant's desperate knocking had finally stopped 3 hours ago. The phone calls from his lawyer had been forwarded to voicemail. Even his mother's tearful pleas through the intercom had been ignored. 23 days. That's how long it had been since Veronica walked out of their penthouse with her suitcases and her new boyfriend's arms around her shoulders. 23 days since she told him that his money couldn't buy her love anymore. 23 days since his perfect life crumbled like sand between his fingers. The divorce papers lay scattered across his desk, mixed with empty Chinese takeout containers and wine-stained contracts. Antonio picked up one of the legal documents, his eyes scanning the words that would divide his billion-dollar empire in half. Community property. Asset division. Spousal support. Each phrase felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He stumbled to his private bathroom, catching his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked nothing like the confident CEO who had graced the cover of Fortune magazine just 2 months ago. His dark hair was greasy and disheveled. His designer shirt was wrinkled and stained with coffee. His brown eyes, which Veronica once said reminded her of warm chocolate, now looked hollow and lifeless. "What's the point?" he whispered to his reflection. "What's the point of any of it?" Antonio had built Rossetti Industries from the ground up. Starting with a small construction company inherited from his father, he had expanded into real estate, technology, and hospitality. He owned hotels in 12 countries, office buildings in every major city, and enough stock portfolios to buy a small country. But none of that mattered now. None of that could fill the empty space where his heart used to be. The intercom buzzed again, making him flinch. His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mr. Rossetti, your mother called again. She's very worried about you. She's threatening to fly here from Naples if you don't answer your phone." Antonio reached over and switched off the intercom system entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled in the late afternoon sun. People were walking on the sidewalks 40 floors below, living their lives, going home to families who actually loved them. The thought made his stomach turn. He opened another bottle of wine, his 4th one today, and poured it into a coffee mug since all his glasses were dirty. The rich red liquid tasted bitter on his tongue, but it was the only thing that numbed the pain anymore. Everything reminded him of Veronica. The leather couch where they used to plan their future. The conference table where she used to surprise him with lunch. Even the stupid expensive coffee machine she had insisted on buying for his office. The worst part was that he should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months. Veronica staying out late with her friends. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Business trips that lasted longer than necessary. But he had been too busy building his empire to notice that his marriage was falling apart. "Stupid," he muttered, taking another swig of wine. "Stupid, blind, worthless fool." His phone buzzed with a text message from his brother Paolo in Italy. "Mama is crying every night. Call her. Call someone. This isn't like you, Antonio." But that was the problem. This was exactly like him. When things got difficult, he ran. When emotions got complicated, he hid behind work. When people needed him to be vulnerable, he built walls higher than his skyscrapers. Veronica had been right about that, at least. He was emotionally unavailable. He was married to his work more than he had ever been married to her. Antonio threw his phone across the room, watching it crash against the wall and fall to the floor in pieces. The satisfaction lasted about 3 seconds before the guilt set in. Now he couldn't even call for help if he wanted to. Not that he wanted to. Help meant admitting that he had failed. Help meant letting people see him like this, broken and pathetic and completely lost. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across his office. The cleaning crew would be arriving soon, but he had sent out a company-wide memo that his office was off limits until further notice. He didn't want anyone to see this mess. He didn't want anyone to see him like this. Antonio slumped back in his leather chair, staring at the ceiling. The wine was making his head spin, but it also made the crushing weight in his chest feel a little lighter. Maybe if he drank enough he could forget about the divorce papers. Maybe he could forget about Veronica's last words to him. "You never really loved me, Antonio. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a beautiful wife to show off at your business parties. But you never loved me." The truth of those words hit him harder than any physical blow could have. Because she was right. He had loved the way other men envied him when he walked into a room with Veronica on his arm. He had loved the way she photographed for magazine spreads about successful couples. He had loved the way she made him look like he had it all together. But had he ever really loved her for who she was? Had he ever asked about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future? Had he ever noticed that she was unhappy until it was too late? The answer made him reach for the wine bottle again. As darkness settled over the city, Antonio Rossetti, billionaire CEO and former golden boy of the business world, curled up on his office couch like a wounded animal. Tomorrow he would have to face the board meeting he had been avoiding. Tomorrow he would have to sign those divorce papers. Tomorrow he would have to figure out how to put his life back together. But tonight, all he could do was drink wine from a coffee mug and wonder how someone who had everything could end up feeling like he had absolutely nothing at all. Rochelle Washington pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the 42nd floor, humming softly to herself. At 52 years old, she had been working the night shift at Rossetti Industries for almost 8 years, and she knew every inch of this building better than she knew her own apartment. The late hours didn't bother her much anymore. After her husband Jerome passed away 5 years ago, the nights at home felt too quiet, too empty. At least here, surrounded by the gentle hum of computers and the soft glow of city lights, she felt useful. She had raised 3 children as a single mother before meeting Jerome, worked 2 jobs to put them all through college, and never complained about the long hours or aching feet. Rochelle believed in the dignity of honest work, no matter what kind of work it was. She took pride in making sure every office was spotless, every trash can empty, every surface gleaming. The executives who worked in these fancy offices might never notice her, but she noticed everything about them. That's why she immediately knew something was wrong with Mr. Rossetti's office. For the past 3 weeks, there had been a memo posted on the cleaning schedule: executive suite off limits until further notice. But Rochelle had been working here long enough to know that something didn't smell right about the whole situation. Mr. Rossetti was always polite to the cleaning staff, unlike some of the other executives. He remembered people's names, asked about their families, and always said thank you when she emptied his trash or watered his plants. Tonight, as she walked past his corner office, she could see light spilling out from under the door. And there was a smell. Not a good smell. She paused, pressing her ear to the thick wooden door. Was that crying? Or maybe the television? Rochelle looked around the empty hallway. The other cleaning ladies were working on different floors. The security guard was making his rounds on the lower levels. She was completely alone. Before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Rossetti? Are you all right in there?" The sound stopped immediately. For a long moment there was complete silence. Then a rough, hoarse voice came through the door. "Go away." Rochelle frowned. That didn't sound like the confident, well-spoken man she had known for 8 years. This voice sounded broken, defeated. She knocked again, more gently this time. "Sir, it's Rochelle from the cleaning crew. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You've been in there for quite a while." I said go away. The voice was louder now, angry. "I don't need help. I don't need anything. Just leave me alone." But Rochelle Washington had raised 3 stubborn children and dealt with a husband who tried to drink away his problems after losing his job. She recognized pain when she heard it, and she had never been one to walk away from someone who was hurting, even when they insisted they wanted to be left alone. Instead of leaving, she sat down on the floor outside his office and opened her thermos of coffee. She always brought extra in case one of the security guards wanted some during their long shifts. The hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. "I'm not going anywhere," she said calmly, loud enough for him to hear through the door. I'm just going to sit here and drink my coffee. You don't have to talk to me, but I'm not leaving you alone like this." There was another long silence. Then she heard movement, the sound of footsteps, and what might have been someone slumping against the door on the other side. "You don't understand," came the voice, quieter now. "You don't know what I've done. You don't know what kind of person I am." Rochelle took a sip of her coffee and settled more comfortably against the wall. "I know you're the kind of person who always holds the elevator door for me when I'm rushing to catch it. I know you're the kind of person who bought flowers for the whole cleaning crew on Mother's Day. I know you're the kind of person who donated money to help my coworker's son when he needed surgery." She paused, listening to the quiet sobs coming from behind the door. Her heart broke a little. This proud, successful man was crying like a lost child. "I also know," she continued gently, "that you're the kind of person who's sitting alone in an office for 3 weeks instead of asking for help when you need it. And honey, everybody needs help sometimes." "My wife left me," the voice whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "She took half of everything and left me for another man. She said I never really loved her. She said I was married to my work more than I was married to her." Rochelle nodded to herself. She had seen Mrs. Rossetti a few times when she came to the office for company parties. A beautiful woman, but always looking around like she was bored or searching for something more interesting. Rochelle had worked enough years to recognize when someone was unhappy, even when they were wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Divorce is hard even when it's for the best. How can it be for the best?" The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. "I lost everything. I lost my wife, my home, half my company. I don't know who I am without all of that." Rochelle set down her coffee cup and leaned her head back against the wall. "Can I tell you something, Mr. Rossetti? When my Jerome died, I thought my world was ending too. We had been together for 15 years. He was my best friend, my partner, my everything. When the cancer took him, I didn't know how to be Rochelle without being Jerome's wife." She could hear that he had stopped crying, that he was listening. "I spent about 6 months feeling sorry for myself," she continued. "I stopped taking care of myself. I stopped calling my children. I stopped doing anything except going to work and going home to cry. And you know what I learned during those 6 months?" "What?" The question came so softly she almost missed it. "I learned that we can't find ourselves by looking at what we've lost. We have to find ourselves by looking at what we still have to give. You're still breathing, Mr. Rossetti. You still have people who care about you. You still have the ability to make a difference in this world. That divorce doesn't change who you are at your core." There was a long pause. Then she heard the sound of the lock clicking and the door opened just a crack. She could see one brown eye peering out at her, and what she saw there made her heart hurt. This man looked like he hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, holding up her thermos. "It's nothing fancy, just regular coffee, but it's hot and it's strong." The door opened a little wider and she got her first full look at Antonio Rossetti. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. His hair was a mess. His face was pale and gaunt. But when he looked at her, she saw something that hadn't been there before, a tiny spark of hope. "I would like that very much," he said quietly. "Thank you, Rochelle." And that was how Rochelle Washington, night shift cleaner and mother of 3, became the first person in 23 days to make Antonio Rossetti remember that he was still human. The next night, Rochelle arrived at work with her usual cleaning supplies and something extra, a container of homemade soup and a sleeve of crackers. She had spent her afternoon off cooking, something she hadn't done much of since Jerome passed away. But the image of Mr. Rossetti's hollow cheeks and tired eyes had stayed with her all day. The man was clearly not taking care of himself. She knocked softly on his office door, which was now unlocked. "Mr. Rossetti? It's Rochelle. I brought you some dinner." "Come in," came the reply, stronger than it had been the night before. Rochelle pushed open the door and nearly gasped. The office was still a disaster zone of empty containers and scattered papers, but Antonio was sitting up straight at his desk, and he had clearly showered and changed clothes. His hair was combed back, and while he still looked exhausted, he looked human again. "You didn't have to bring me food," he said, but his eyes were fixed on the container in her hands with an expression that looked almost like hunger. "Of course I didn't have to," Rochelle said, setting the soup down on his desk and clearing away some of the empty takeout boxes. "But I wanted to. When's the last time you had a home-cooked meal?" Antonio thought about it for a moment, his face growing sad. "Veronica didn't cook much. We always ordered in or went to restaurants. Before that..." He paused. "Before that, I guess it was when I visited my mother in Naples last Christmas." Rochelle opened the container, and the smell of chicken and vegetables filled the air. She had made extra, thinking that maybe sharing a meal would help both of them. Since Jerome died, she usually just heated up frozen dinners for one. "This smells incredible," Antonio said, taking the spoon she offered him. "What is it?" "Just chicken soup," Rochelle said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "My grandmother's recipe. She always said that soup could cure anything that ailed you, from a broken heart to a broken leg." Antonio took a tentative sip, then another larger one. His eyes actually closed with pleasure. "This is the best thing I've tasted in months," he said. "Maybe years." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Rochelle found herself studying this man she had known from a distance for so many years. Without the confident businessman mask, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. She could see why his wife's betrayal had hurt him so deeply. He was the kind of person who loved completely, even if he didn't always know how to show it. "Can I ask you something?" Antonio said finally, setting down his spoon. "Of course. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't really know me. For all you know, I deserved what happened with my marriage." Rochelle considered this question seriously. "Do you think you deserved it?" Antonio was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I did. I wasn't a very good husband. I was always working. I never asked her what she wanted or what would make her happy. I just assumed that providing for her financially was enough." "That doesn't sound like someone who deserved to be cheated on and abandoned," Rochelle said gently. "That sounds like someone who didn't know how to love properly because nobody ever taught him how." "My parents had a good marriage," Antonio said defensively. "Did they? Or did they have a traditional marriage where your father worked and your mother took care of the house and children? That's different from a partnership." Antonio stared at her for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "You're right. My father was never home. My mother ran the household like a business. They respected each other, but I don't think I ever saw them have a real conversation about anything except logistics." "So you modeled your marriage after what you knew," Rochelle said. "That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human." Over the following week, Rochelle fell into a routine. Every night when she arrived at work, she would stop by Antonio's office with something: homemade bread, leftover casserole, fresh fruit, or just a cup of good coffee. They would talk while she cleaned his office, which she had finally convinced him to let her do. "You don't have to clean up after me," he had protested the first time she started collecting the empty containers and wine bottles. "Honey, this is my job," she had replied firmly. "And besides, nobody thinks clearly in a mess like this." As the office became cleaner and more organized, Antonio seemed to become more organized too. He started showering regularly, changing his clothes, and even attempting to comb his hair. He began answering some of his phone calls, though he still refused to see visitors or attend meetings. "My board is threatening to remove me," he told her one night while she dusted his bookshelf. "They say I'm having a breakdown and I'm not fit to run the company." "Are they wrong?" Rochelle asked, not unkindly. Antonio considered this. "Probably not. I haven't been able to focus on anything except the divorce for weeks. I've missed important meetings, ignored critical decisions. The company is probably better off without me right now." "The company maybe," Rochelle said, moving to water his plants, which were looking much healthier since she had started caring for them. "But what about you? What do you want?" "I don't know," Antonio admitted. "I built this whole life around being successful, being important, being needed. Without that, I don't know who I am." Rochelle paused in her work and looked at him seriously. "You know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" "I see a man who tips the delivery drivers extra during the holidays. I see someone who remembers that the security guard's daughter is getting married and asks how the wedding planning is going. I see someone who donated $1 million to build a new wing at the children's hospital and didn't want his name on it." Antonio stared at her. "How do you know about that?" "Honey, I've been cleaning these offices for 8 years. I see the charitable donation records when you leave them on your desk. I hear you on the phone with your mother telling her you love her in Italian. I've watched you stay late to help your assistant when her son was having trouble in school." She smiled at him. "You think being a good businessman is all you are, but you're wrong. You're a good man who just forgot how to see it." That night, for the first time since she had started visiting him, Antonio walked her to the elevator when her shift ended. "Rochelle," he said as the elevator arrived. "Thank you. For everything. You've saved my life these past few weeks." She patted his arm gently. "You would have saved yourself eventually. I just gave you a little reminder of who you really are." As the elevator doors closed, Rochelle saw Antonio standing in the hallway, looking more like himself than he had in weeks. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe Jerome would be proud of the woman she had become without him. 2 weeks later, Antonio was waiting for Rochelle when she arrived for her shift. He had spent the day in actual meetings, wearing a real suit, and had even managed to make some important business decisions without falling apart. But the best part of his day was still the evening, when he could talk to the one person who seemed to understand him. "Good evening, Rochelle," he said, opening his office door before she could knock. "How was your day off?" "It was nice," she said, smiling at the sight of him looking so much more like himself. "I visited my daughter and helped her with some wedding planning. What about you? You look like you actually left this office today." "I did," Antonio said proudly. "I attended a board meeting, reviewed 3 contracts, and even had lunch with a client. My assistant nearly fainted when I walked into the conference room." Rochelle laughed, a warm sound that made something in Antonio's chest feel lighter. "I'm proud of you. That must have been hard." "It was," he admitted, helping her move her cleaning cart into his office. "But you were right. I can't hide in here forever. The company needs leadership, and whether I like it or not, I'm still the CEO." As Rochelle began her usual routine of tidying up and restocking his coffee machine, Antonio found himself watching her with new eyes. Over the past month, this woman had shown him more genuine kindness than he had received from anyone else in years. She asked about his day not because she had to, but because she actually cared about the answer. She brought him food not because he paid her to, but because she was worried about his health. She listened to his problems without judgment and offered advice without trying to fix him. "Rochelle," he said suddenly, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from watering his plants. "Sure. Why did you never remarry after your husband died? You're an amazing woman. I'm sure there were men who would have been lucky to have you." Rochelle was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "There were a few who asked," she said finally. "But I guess I never found anyone who loved me for the right reasons. Jerome loved me because I made him laugh, because I challenged him to be better, because we were partners in everything. The men I met after he died seemed to want someone to take care of them, or someone to take care of their children, or someone to fill a lonely space in their lives." She paused, moving to dust his bookshelf. "I'd rather be alone and loved by my children and grandchildren than be with someone who doesn't see my real value." Antonio nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Veronica used to say that I didn't see her real value either. I thought providing for her financially and giving her a beautiful home was enough. But she wanted a partner, not a provider." "What do you want now?" Rochelle asked gently. "I want to be the kind of man who deserves a partner like that," Antonio said without hesitation. "I want to be someone who asks how your day was and actually listens to the answer. I want to be someone who shows up when people need me, not just when it's convenient for my schedule." Rochelle smiled at him, and Antonio felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine happiness. "You know," he said, an idea forming in his mind, "I've been thinking about making some changes to the company. We have all this money sitting in accounts, earning interest but not really helping anyone. What if we started a foundation? Something that could make a real difference in people's lives." "That sounds wonderful," Rochelle said, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. "What kind of foundation?" "I was thinking about education, maybe. Scholarships for kids whose parents work multiple jobs like you did when you were raising your children. Or job training programs for people who want to learn new skills but can't afford the classes." Rochelle stopped dusting and turned to face him fully. "Antonio, that's a beautiful idea. You could help so many families." The way she said his name with such warmth and pride made his heart skip a beat. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like that? When was the last time someone had looked at him the way Rochelle was looking at him now, like he was capable of doing something truly worthwhile? "Would you help me?" he asked impulsively. "With the foundation, I mean. You understand what working families need better than I do. You could help me make sure we're actually helping people instead of just throwing money at problems." "I would be honored," Rochelle said, and Antonio could see that she meant it. "But I should probably mention that I don't know anything about running a foundation or working with that kind of money." "I don't either," Antonio admitted. "But I know how to learn, and I know how to hire good people to teach us what we don't know. The important thing is that we understand why we're doing it." They spent the rest of the evening brainstorming ideas for the foundation, and Antonio found himself more excited about work than he had been in years. Not because of the money or the power or the recognition, but because of the possibility of actually making a difference. "I should let you finish your work," he said finally, noticing that it was nearly midnight and Rochelle hadn't cleaned any other offices yet. "It's all right," she said, but he could see that she was tired. "No, it's not all right. I've been selfish, keeping you here when you have other responsibilities. Tomorrow night, how about you clean the other offices first and then we can talk about the foundation? Rochelle smiled at him. Look at you thinking about other people's needs. You're already becoming that better man you wanted to be. As she packed up her cleaning supplies, Antonio felt a strange reluctance to see her go. These evening conversations had become the best part of his day, the thing he looked forward to most. But more than that, he was starting to realize that his feelings for Rochelle were becoming more than just gratitude. Rochelle, he said as she reached the door. Thank you. Not just for tonight but for everything. You've given me back my life. She paused in the doorway and looked back at him. You always had a good life, Antonio. You just needed someone to remind you how to see it. After she left, Antonio sat alone in his clean, organized office and realized something that both excited and terrified him. He was falling in love with Rochelle Washington. And for the first time in his adult life, he was falling in love with someone for all the right reasons. The foundation idea consumed Antonio's thoughts for the next several days. He found himself staying at the office later than usual, not to hide from the world anymore, but because he was genuinely excited to discuss his plans with Rochelle each evening. He had started looking forward to their conversations with an anticipation that surprised him. I've been doing some research, he told her when she arrived for her shift on Thursday night. His desk was covered with printouts about educational nonprofits and scholarship programs. Did you know that students whose parents work in service industries are 40% less likely to finish college, even when they have good grades? Rochelle paused in setting up her cleaning supplies to look at the papers he was showing her. I'm not surprised, she said. When I was trying to put my kids through school, there were so many nights I had to choose between buying groceries and buying textbooks. And my kids were lucky because I was working steady jobs. A lot of their friends had parents working unpredictable hours or seasonal work. Tell me about that, Antonio said, pulling up a chair for her. I want to understand what it was really like. Rochelle sat down, recognizing that this conversation was important to him. Well, I was working here at night and cleaning office buildings downtown during the day. My daughter Keisha was in high school and she needed so many things. Senior pictures, graduation fees, college application costs, SAT prep books. Each thing by itself wasn't that expensive, but all together. She shook her head at the memory. How did you manage it? I took on weekend cleaning jobs. I sold some of my grandmother's jewelry. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches so I could afford to send the kids to school with real lunches. She smiled at him. You do what you have to do when you love someone. Antonio was quiet for a moment, processing what she had told him. How much would it have helped if there had been a program that covered those extra costs? The application fees and test prep and things like that? It would have changed everything, Rochelle said without hesitation. Not just financially but emotionally too. Do you know how hard it is to watch your smart, talented child worry about whether they'll be able to go to college because of money? It breaks your heart every single day. What did your children study? Rochelle's face lit up with pride. My oldest, Marcus, he's a teacher now. Elementary school. My daughter Keisha became a nurse and my youngest, Deshaun, he's an engineer. They all did so well, better than I ever dreamed possible. They had a good example to follow, Antonio said. You worked multiple jobs to make sure they had opportunities you never had. My parents worked hard too, Rochelle said. My daddy was a mechanic and my mama cleaned houses just like I do. But they made sure I graduated high school, which was more than a lot of kids in our neighborhood got. Each generation tries to do a little better than the one before. Antonio found himself fascinated by her family history. His own family story was so different. Generations of successful businessmen, private schools, trust funds, and connections that opened doors before he even had to knock. The idea of working multiple jobs just to afford basic necessities was completely foreign to him, but he was beginning to understand how much strength and dedication it required. What was it like when you met Jerome? He asked. How did you know he was the right person? Rochelle smiled, the same warm expression she always got when she talked about her late husband. Jerome was working construction then, and he used to stop by the diner where I was waitressing on weekends. He always ordered the same thing, coffee, eggs over easy wheat toast. And he always left me $1 tip, even when that was probably more than he could afford. She paused to refill his coffee cup from the pot she had started brewing. What I noticed about him was that he never talked down to me or acted like serving him food was beneath my dignity. A lot of men, they would make jokes about waitresses or act like I was just there for their entertainment. But Jerome always said please and thank you, and he asked about my children like he actually cared about the answer. That sounds like a man who understood your real value, Antonio said, remembering their earlier conversation. He did. And when we got married, he didn't try to change me or make me into someone I wasn't. He loved that I was independent and strong. He loved that I had opinions about things and wasn't afraid to share them. He never made me feel like I had to choose between being his wife and being myself. Antonio felt a pang of recognition. Veronica used to say I tried to make her into the perfect corporate wife. I wanted her to enjoy the charity galas and business dinners, but I never asked if those things made her happy. I just assumed she should be grateful for the lifestyle I could provide. What did make her happy? Rochelle asked gently. Art, Antonio said after thinking about it. She loved painting and visiting galleries. She used to talk about maybe taking art classes or even opening a small gallery someday. But I always dismissed it as a hobby, something cute that she could do in her spare time. Did you ever go to galleries with her? Antonio's face flushed with shame. Once or twice, but I was always checking my phone or thinking about work. I treated it like an obligation instead of something that mattered to her. Rochelle reached across the desk and patted his hand gently. You can't change the past, honey. But you can learn from it. How do you do that? Antonio asked. How do you love someone the right way? Rochelle considered this question seriously. I think it starts with paying attention. Really paying attention to what makes them happy, what worries them, what they dream about when they think nobody's listening. And then you try to support those dreams, even if you don't understand them. Jerome supported your dreams? He did. When I wanted to go back to school to get my GED, he worked extra hours so I could afford the classes. When I talked about maybe learning to use computers someday, he bought me an old one from his friend and spent hours teaching me how to use it. He never made me feel stupid for not knowing things. Antonio found himself imagining what it would be like to have someone support his dreams that way. But then he realized something troubling. He wasn't sure what his dreams were anymore. For so long, his only goal had been building his business empire and accumulating wealth. What did he actually want from life? Can I tell you something? He said suddenly. I don't think I have any real dreams. I mean, besides the foundation idea, which is new. I've spent so much time focused on being successful that I never stopped to think about what success actually means to me. What did you want to be when you were a child? Rochelle asked. Antonio smiled at the memory. A teacher, actually. Like your son. I loved reading and learning new things, and I thought it would be amazing to help other kids discover that same excitement about knowledge. What happened to that dream? My father happened, Antonio said with a bitter laugh. He told me that teaching was a noble profession for people who couldn't succeed in the real world. He said I had a responsibility to carry on the family business, to build something bigger than what he had built. And you listened to him. I worshipped him, Antonio admitted. He was this larger-than-life figure who seemed to have all the answers. It never occurred to me that maybe his definition of success wasn't the only one that mattered. Rochelle was quiet for a moment, letting him process what he had just said. It's not too late, you know, to figure out what you actually want. I'm 45 years old, Antonio protested. I can't just become a teacher now. Why not? You could teach business classes at a community college. You could mentor young entrepreneurs. You could create educational programs through your foundation. She smiled at him. There are lots of ways to teach, Antonio. You just have to be creative about it. The idea excited him more than he wanted to admit. You really think I could do something like that? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. The question is what would make you happy. Antonio looked around his luxurious office, with its expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. For the first time in his life, he could imagine being somewhere else, doing something that mattered more than profit margins and stock prices. I think, he said slowly, I'd like to try teaching. Maybe start small, see if I'm any good at it. I think you'd be wonderful at it, Rochelle said warmly. You're patient and kind and you explain things clearly. Look how excited you get when you're talking about the foundation. That's the passion teachers need. As Rochelle went about her cleaning duties, Antonio found himself thinking about their conversation. For the first time in months, he wasn't dwelling on what he had lost with his divorce. Instead, he was thinking about what he might gain by being brave enough to change his life. Rochelle, he said as she was preparing to leave. Would you like to have dinner sometime? I mean a real dinner, not just soup in my office. I'd like to take you somewhere nice, to thank you for everything you've done for me. She paused, and for a moment Antonio worried he had overstepped. But then she smiled. I would like that very much. But only if you promise it's not just about thanking me. What do you mean? I mean I hope you're asking because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated to repay a debt. Antonio felt his heart speed up. I'm asking because talking to you is the best part of my day. I'm asking because I want to know more about you and I want you to know more about me. I'm asking because... He paused, gathering his courage. Because I care about you, Rochelle. More than I probably should. Her smile was radiant. In that case, yes. I would love to have dinner with you. Antonio spent the entire next day planning their dinner. He had eaten at the finest restaurants in New York, Paris, and Rome, but choosing the right place for Rochelle felt more important than any business dinner he had ever arranged. It needed to be somewhere special but not intimidating, elegant but warm, the kind of place where they could talk without feeling like they were being watched. He finally decided on a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, the kind of family-owned place that reminded him of his childhood visits to his grandmother in Naples. The food was exceptional but the atmosphere was comfortable, and the owner, Giuseppe, had been a friend of his father's for many years. When Saturday evening arrived, Antonio found himself more nervous than he had been before any board meeting or business presentation. He changed clothes 3 times before settling on a navy blazer and khakis, wanting to look nice without being too formal. As he drove to pick up Rochelle at her apartment in Queens, he realized his hands were actually shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Rochelle lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building. When she opened the door, Antonio's breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress with a pearl necklace, and she looked absolutely beautiful. But more than that, she looked happy and excited, and seeing her smile made all his nervousness melt away. "You look stunning," he said, offering her his arm. "Thank you," she said, blushing slightly. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The drive to the restaurant was filled with comfortable conversation about her week and his progress with foundation research. Antonio found himself relaxing completely in her presence, something that hadn't happened with anyone else in years. Giuseppe greeted them at the door with enthusiastic Italian and warm hugs for Antonio. "Ah, Antonio. You look much better than the last time I saw you. And who is this beautiful lady?" "Giuseppe, this is Rochelle Washington," Antonio said proudly. "Rochelle, this is Giuseppe Battaglia. His family has owned this restaurant for 40 years. "Welcome, welcome," Giuseppe said, taking Rochelle's hand and kissing it gallantly. "Any friend of Antonio's is family here. Come, I have the perfect table for you." He led them to a quiet corner table with candles and fresh flowers, where they could see the bustling kitchen but still have privacy for conversation. The whole restaurant felt alive with the sounds of families enjoying their meals and the rich aromas of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh bread. "This place is wonderful," Rochelle said, looking around with genuine delight. "It feels like someone's home." "That's exactly what Giuseppe intended," Antonio said. His grandmother started cooking for neighborhood families in her apartment, and it just grew from there. 3 generations later, they're still using her recipes. Giuseppe returned with a bottle of wine and an array of appetizers. "From the family," he said with a wink. "The lady must try my grandmother's meatballs and my mother's bruschetta. Antonio, you know these are your favorites." As they sampled the food and talked, Antonio found himself telling Rochelle stories about his childhood that he had never shared with anyone, not even Veronica. He told her about learning to cook with his Italian grandmother, about the summer he spent working in his father's construction crew to learn the business from the ground up, about his dreams of traveling the world to teach English to children who couldn't afford school. "You should do that," Rochelle said when he mentioned the teaching dream again. "Maybe through your foundation. You could create educational programs in developing countries." "You really think I could?" Antonio asked. "I mean, I have no experience with international development or anything like that." "Honey, you have something more valuable than experience," Rochelle said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "You have genuine desire to help people and the resources to make it happen. You can hire people with experience, but you can't hire people who care as much as you do." Antonio turned his hand over to hold hers properly, marveling at how right it felt. "What about you? What dreams did you give up to take care of your family?" Rochelle was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I always wanted to write," she said finally. "Not novels or anything fancy, just stories about real people and their lives. I used to write little articles for the community newsletter, and people would tell me they enjoyed reading them." "What kind of stories?" "Stories about the woman who worked 3 jobs to send her son to medical school. Stories about the elderly man who taught neighborhood kids to read because the local school didn't have enough teachers. Stories about people who don't usually get their stories told." Antonio felt a surge of excitement. "Rochelle, that's exactly what the foundation needs. We need someone who can tell the stories of the people we're helping, someone who can show donors why this work matters." You could be our director of communications. I don't have any experience with that kind of work, Rochelle protested. Neither do I, Antonio said with a laugh. We'll learn together. Besides, I've read some of those community newsletter articles. Giuseppe saves them all because he says you write about his restaurant like poetry. Rochelle looked surprised. He saves my articles? He does. He's very proud that you featured his family's story. He told me it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever written about their restaurant. As the evening progressed, they discovered more and more things they had in common despite their very different backgrounds. They both loved old movies and jazz music. They both preferred quiet evenings at home to big social events. They both believed that small acts of kindness could change the world. Can I tell you something? Antonio said as they shared dessert, a rich tiramisu that Giuseppe had insisted they try. I haven't felt this comfortable with anyone in years. Maybe ever. What do you mean? I mean, I feel like I can be myself with you. Not the successful businessman or the wealthy CEO or any of the other roles I usually play. Just me. Rochelle smiled at him. That's because I'm not interested in any of those other things. I'm interested in the man who brings soup to elderly neighbors and remembers the names of security guards' children. I'm interested in the man who wants to use his success to help other people succeed. Is that really how you see me? That's exactly how I see you. And I think that's how you're starting to see yourself too. As Antonio drove Rochelle home that evening, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of himself and what he wanted from life. For the first time since his divorce, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he might have found. Thank you for tonight, Rochelle said as they reached her building. I had a wonderful time. So did I, Antonio said. Would you like to do this again? Soon. I would love that, she said. But next time let me cook for you. I'd like to return the favor. As he watched her walk into her building, Antonio realized he was smiling. Not the polite, professional smile he wore during business meetings, but a real smile that came from genuine happiness. For the first time in months he was looking forward to tomorrow. The following week passed in a blur of anticipation for Antonio. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, but not the frantic, escape-focused energy of before. This time he was genuinely excited about the projects he was developing, especially the foundation plans that he and Rochelle had been discussing. He had started staying at the office until Rochelle's shift began, not because he was hiding from his life, but because he looked forward to seeing her every evening. Their conversations had become the highlight of his day, and he found himself making notes throughout the day about things he wanted to share with her. You seem different, his assistant, Patricia, commented on Thursday afternoon. More like your old self, but happier somehow. Antonio smiled. I am happier. I think I'm finally figuring out what's important. The divorce is final next week, Patricia said gently. Are you ready for that? I am, Antonio said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Veronica and I weren't right for each other. We both deserve to be with people who appreciate who we really are. That evening when Rochelle arrived for her shift, she brought a small wrapped package with her. What's this? Antonio asked, accepting the gift with curiosity. Just something I thought you might like, she said, looking slightly nervous. Open it. Inside the package was a small leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. For your teaching ideas, Rochelle explained. I thought you might want to write down your thoughts about the foundation and the educational programs you want to create. Antonio was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. This is perfect, he said. Thank you so much. There's something else, Rochelle said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I wrote something for you. About the foundation idea. I thought maybe you could use it when you're talking to potential donors or board members. Antonio unfolded the paper and began to read. It was a beautifully written description of what the foundation could accomplish, told through the story of a hypothetical student whose life would be changed by the scholarships and support programs they were planning. The writing was clear, compelling, and deeply moving. Rochelle, this is incredible, he said when he finished reading. You've captured exactly what we're trying to do, but in a way that makes people care about it emotionally, not just intellectually. You really think it's good? I think it's brilliant. I think you're brilliant. He looked at her seriously. I meant what I said about you being our director of communications. You have a gift for this. Over the next few weeks, they began working together more formally on the foundation plans. Rochelle would arrive early for her shift, and they would spend an hour or two developing programs, writing mission statements, and researching other successful educational nonprofits. Antonio was amazed by her insights and her ability to identify potential problems he hadn't considered. What about students who qualify for scholarships but don't have reliable internet access? She asked one evening as they reviewed application procedures. A lot of the families we want to help live in areas where high-speed internet is expensive or unavailable. I hadn't thought of that, Antonio admitted. What do you suggest? Maybe we could partner with public libraries or community centers. Or maybe we could provide tablets or laptops as part of the scholarship package. That's a great idea. We could create technology centers in underserved communities. Their professional collaboration naturally deepened their personal relationship. They began having dinner together twice a week, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at Rochelle's apartment where she would cook the kind of hearty, delicious meals that reminded Antonio of his childhood visits to Italy. "This is amazing," he said one evening as she served him homemade lasagna with fresh bread. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother taught me when I was young, and then I learned more when I was raising my children. When you're feeding a family on a tight budget, you learn to make simple ingredients taste special." Antonio helped her clean up after dinner, something that would have been unthinkable in his marriage to Veronica. But with Rochelle, everything felt natural and comfortable. They worked side by side in her small kitchen, talking and laughing as they washed dishes and put away leftovers. "Can I ask you something?" Rochelle said as they finished cleaning. "What was your marriage really like? Not the public version, but the real version." Antonio dried his hands and leaned against her kitchen counter, thinking about how to answer honestly. "Lonely," he said finally. "Even when we were in the same room, I felt like we were living separate lives. We never talked about anything real. We never shared our fears or dreams or hopes for the future. Did you try to change that? I don't think I knew how. In my family, emotions were private things. You didn't discuss your feelings or ask other people about theirs. You just focused on your responsibilities and assumed that was enough." Rochelle sat down at her small kitchen table and gestured for him to join her. "That must have been so isolating." "It was. And the terrible thing is, I think Veronica was just as lonely as I was. She tried to connect with me sometimes, but I didn't know how to respond. I thought providing for her financially and being a reliable husband was the same as being a loving husband." "What would you do differently now?" Antonio thought about this question seriously. "I would ask more questions. I would pay attention to the answers. I would share my own fears and insecurities instead of pretending I had everything figured out." He paused, looking at her across the table. "I would try to be the kind of partner you deserve." The words hung in the air between them, and Antonio realized he had just crossed a line from friendship into something more serious. But instead of taking it back, he found himself moving forward. "Rochelle, I need you to know something. What I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for Veronica. This is real. This is about who you are as a person, not what you can do for me or how you make me look to other people." Rochelle reached across the table and took his hand. "I feel the same way," she said quietly. "I wasn't looking for this, Antonio. After Jerome died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you've made me remember what it feels like to be truly cared for." "I want to be with you," Antonio said. "Not just for dinner dates or foundation meetings. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Rochelle smiled, and Antonio thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. "I want that too," she said. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to change who I am to fit into your world. I'm a working woman from Queens who raised 3 children and cleaned offices for 8 years. If we're going to be together, you have to be okay with that." "I'm not just okay with that," Antonio said earnestly. "I'm proud of that. You're the strongest, most admirable person I've ever met. Why would I want you to change?" As they sat in her small kitchen, holding hands across her modest table, Antonio realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the rush of closing a big business deal or the satisfaction of seeing his name in magazine articles. This quiet, genuine connection with someone who loved him for who he really was. For the first time in his adult life, Antonio Rossetti knew exactly what he wanted. And what he wanted was sitting right across from him, smiling at him like he was the most important person in the world. The next month passed like a beautiful dream for both Antonio and Rochelle. They had settled into a comfortable routine of working together on the foundation during the evenings and spending their weekends exploring the city together. Antonio found himself seeing New York through Rochelle's eyes, visiting neighborhoods he had never bothered to explore and meeting people whose stories fascinated him. "I can't believe I've lived here for 20 years and never been to this market," he said one Saturday as they walked through a bustling farmer's market in Brooklyn. Rochelle was selecting vegetables for a dinner she planned to cook for him, and Antonio was carrying her bags like any normal boyfriend would do. "You probably never had a reason to come here before," Rochelle said, examining tomatoes with the practiced eye of someone who knew how to stretch a grocery budget. "When you can afford to eat at any restaurant in the city, why would you need to cook at home?" "Because this is better," Antonio said, watching her interact warmly with the elderly Italian man selling vegetables. "This feels real in a way that those expensive restaurants never did." The vendor, who had been chatting with Rochelle in broken English, suddenly switched to rapid Italian when he heard Antonio's name. Antonio responded fluently, and soon the two men were discussing the vendor's family back in Sicily and sharing stories about their grandmother's cooking. "I didn't know you spoke Italian so well," Rochelle said as they walked away with an extra pound of tomatoes that the vendor had insisted they take for free. "My parents insisted I maintain the language," Antonio said. "But I haven't used it much in recent years. Veronica always said it was rude to speak Italian when other people couldn't understand." "That's silly," Rochelle said. "Language is part of who you are. Jerome used to love hearing me speak French with my grandmother. He said it made me light up in a way that English never did." "You speak French?" "My grandmother was from Haiti," Rochelle explained. "She taught me when I was little. I'm probably rusty now, but I still dream in French sometimes." Antonio marveled at how much he was still learning about this woman he was falling deeper in love with every day. With Veronica, he had known her entire life story within the first few months of dating. But Rochelle revealed new layers of herself constantly, and each discovery made him appreciate her more. That evening, as Rochelle cooked dinner in his penthouse kitchen, Antonio watched her move around the space with easy confidence. She had initially been intimidated by his luxurious apartment, but now she treated it like it was partly hers too, which made him happier than any expensive piece of art or furniture ever had. "I've been thinking," Rochelle said as she stirred the sauce she was making, "about the foundation and our long-term plans." "What about them?" "Well, if we're going to be running this together, we need to talk about how that's going to work. I don't want people to think I got the job just because I'm dating the founder." Antonio set down the wine glass he had been holding and looked at her seriously. "Is that what you're worried about?" "Partly," Rochelle admitted. "I want to earn my position based on my abilities, not on our relationship." "You have earned it," Antonio said firmly. "The foundation was your idea as much as mine. The programs we're developing came from your insights about what working families actually need. The mission statement that everyone loves? You wrote that. Your relationship with me has nothing to do with your qualifications. I know that and you know that, but other people might not see it the same way." Antonio moved to stand beside her at the stove, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Then we'll prove them wrong. We'll make the foundation so successful and so helpful to people that no one can question whether you deserve to be there." Rochelle leaned back against his chest, enjoying the feeling of being held and supported. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. We're good at this work because we care about it and because we complement each other's strengths. You understand people and I understand business. You can tell stories that make people care and I can structure programs that actually work. Together, we're going to change lives." "I love how confident you are about this," Rochelle said, turning in his arms to face him. 6 months ago, you were locked in your office convinced that your life was over. Now you're talking about changing the world. 6 months ago, I hadn't met you, Antonio said, cupping her face in his hands. "You didn't just save my life, Rochelle. You helped me find a life worth living." "You would have found your way eventually," she said, but Antonio shook his head. "No, I wouldn't have. I would have gone through the motions of rebuilding my business and probably would have made the same mistakes in my next relationship. You taught me how to see what really matters." "What really matters?" "This," Antonio said, gesturing to encompass the kitchen where they were cooking together, the comfortable conversation they had been having, the easy intimacy of their relationship. Being with someone who knows who you really are and loves you anyway. Having work that makes a difference in people's lives. Building something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Rochelle smiled up at him. "You know what I love about you?" "What?" "You're not afraid to feel things anymore. When I first met you, you were so closed off from your own emotions. But now you say exactly what you're thinking and feeling, even when it makes you vulnerable." "I learned that from you," Antonio said. "You've never been afraid to be real with me even when I was at my lowest point. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to have a real connection with another person." As they finished cooking dinner together, Antonio found himself thinking about how much his definition of success had changed. 6 months ago, success meant profit margins, stock prices, and business acquisitions. Now success meant the feeling of Rochelle's hand in his as they walked through the farmer's market. Success meant the excitement in her voice when she talked about the stories she wanted to write for the foundation. Success meant knowing that he was building something that would outlast him and make the world a little bit better. "Rochelle," he said as they sat down to eat the meal they had prepared together. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm in love with you. Completely, totally, head over heels in love with you. And I know it might seem too soon to say that, but I don't want to waste any more time pretending I feel less than I do." Rochelle set down her fork and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Antonio," she said softly. "I love you too. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it because I didn't want to pressure you or complicate things." "Why would that complicate things?" "Because loving someone means trusting them with your whole heart, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for that kind of trust." Antonio reached across the table and took her hands in his. "I'm ready," he said. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." "Are you?" Rochelle squeezed his hands and smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready to love you and be loved by you and build something beautiful together." As they held hands across the dinner table in Antonio's penthouse, with the lights of Manhattan twinkling below them and the foundation plans scattered on the nearby counter, both of them knew that they had found something rare and precious. They had found the kind of love that makes people better versions of themselves, the kind of partnership that creates more good in the world than either person could accomplish alone. And for the first time in either of their lives, they both knew exactly what they wanted their future to look like. 3 months later, the Rossetti Education Foundation officially opened its doors in a renovated building in downtown Manhattan. The offices were bright and welcoming, designed to feel approachable to the families they served rather than intimidating like traditional corporate spaces. Rochelle had insisted on comfortable seating areas where parents and students could feel at ease while discussing their educational goals and financial needs. Antonio stood in the main conference room, watching Rochelle give a presentation to their first board meeting. She was explaining the pilot scholarship program they had developed, using charts and graphs that showed not just the financial impact but the human stories behind the numbers. Every board member was leaning forward, completely engaged by her passionate and articulate description of their work. "As you can see from our first quarter results," Rochelle was saying, "we've already helped 53 students with college application fees, SAT preparation, and textbook vouchers. But more importantly, we've connected these students with mentors and support systems that will help them succeed throughout their college years." Dr. Margaret Williams, the former Dean of Education at Columbia University and their most prestigious board member, raised her hand. "Ms. Washington, can you tell us more about the mentorship component? That wasn't in the original proposal." "Of course," Rochelle said smoothly. "We discovered that many of our scholarship recipients were the first in their families to attend college, which meant they didn't have built-in support systems for navigating academic and social challenges. So we developed partnerships with successful professionals who volunteer their time to guide these students through their college experience." Antonio felt a surge of pride watching Rochelle command the room with such confidence and expertise. When she had first expressed concern about people questioning her qualifications, he had known that her abilities would speak for themselves. Now, watching her field complex questions from accomplished educators and business leaders, he could see that every person in that room respected her knowledge and vision. After the meeting ended and the board members had left, Antonio approached Rochelle with a huge smile on his face. "That was incredible," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Did you see Dr. Williams' face when you explained the mentorship program? She looked like she wanted to sign up to be a mentor herself." "She actually did sign up," Rochelle said with a laugh. "She handed me her card after the meeting and asked to be paired with a student studying education." "You're amazing," Antonio said, spinning her around the empty conference room. 6 months ago, you were worried about whether you could handle this job, and now you're running board meetings like you've been doing it for years." "I had a good teacher," Rochelle said, straightening his tie affectionately. "And I had someone who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "I just saw what was already there," Antonio said. "Your compassion, your intelligence, your ability to connect with people and make them care about important things. All I did was give you a platform to use those gifts." "Is that all you did?" Rochelle asked teasingly. "Because I seem to remember you completely changing your life priorities, learning to cook, and becoming the kind of man who asks about people's dreams instead of just their quarterly projections." Antonio considered this seriously. "You're right. We changed each other. We brought out the best in each other." "We did," Rochelle agreed. "And that's exactly what I was hoping for when I decided to trust you with my heart." That evening, they went to dinner at Giuseppe's restaurant to celebrate the successful board meeting. Giuseppe greeted them like family as he always did, and insisted on bringing them his special wine to mark the occasion. To the foundation, Giuseppe said, raising his glass. And to love that makes the world better. As they ate and talked about their plans for expanding the scholarship program, Antonio found himself thinking about how dramatically his life had changed in less than a year. He was still a successful businessman, but now his success was measured in students helped rather than dollars earned. He was still wealthy, but now his wealth was a tool for creating opportunities for others rather than just accumulating more for himself. He was still ambitious, but now his ambitions centered around making a positive impact rather than building his own empire. Most importantly, he was loved by someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. Rochelle knew about his failures, his insecurities, and his past mistakes, but she loved him not despite those things but because of how he had grown from them. "Rochelle," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I have something I want to ask you." She looked at him curiously, noting the serious tone in his voice. "What is it?" Antonio took a deep breath, feeling more nervous than he had before any business presentation he had ever given. "I want to ask you to marry me." Rochelle's eyes widened in surprise. "Antonio. I know it might seem fast," he continued quickly, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build the foundation together and maybe travel the world setting up educational programs in places that need them. I want to be your partner in everything." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "This isn't about replacing what you had with Jerome," he said earnestly. "I know that was special and unique and irreplaceable. This is about creating something new together, something that's just ours." Rochelle looked at the ring, then back at Antonio's hopeful face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." Antonio slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood up to kiss her as the entire restaurant broke into applause. Giuseppe was beaming like a proud father, and several other diners were wiping away tears of their own. "I love you," Antonio whispered against her lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Rochelle whispered back. "Forever and always." As they held each other in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by the warmth and joy of people who cared about them, Antonio realized that this was what true success looked like. Not the magazine covers or the business awards or the expensive possessions, but this moment of pure happiness shared with the person who mattered most. He had locked himself in his office 10 months ago believing that his life was over. Instead, it had just been waiting to begin. 6 months later, on a beautiful spring morning in Central Park, Antonio Rossetti and Rochelle Washington were married in a ceremony that perfectly reflected who they had become together. Instead of an elaborate church wedding or expensive hotel ballroom, they chose to exchange vows in the Shakespeare Garden, surrounded by a small group of family and close friends. Rochelle wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that she had chosen because it made her feel beautiful rather than because it was expensive or impressive. Antonio wore a navy suit with a boutonniere made from flowers they had grown together in the small garden they had started on his penthouse terrace. The guest list was small but meaningful. Rochelle's 3 children and their families, Antonio's mother who had flown in from Italy, Giuseppe and his wife, Dr. Williams and several other foundation board members, and a few close friends they had made through their work together. Notably absent were the society figures and business associates who would have filled Antonio's first wedding. This celebration was about love, not networking. "Dearly beloved," began Father Michael, the priest from Rochelle's neighborhood church who had agreed to perform the ceremony. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 people who have found in each other not just love, but purpose and joy." As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, both Antonio and Rochelle felt the weight of how far they had traveled to reach this moment. "Rochelle," Antonio said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "You found me when I was lost and helped me discover who I really wanted to be. You taught me that love isn't about what you can get from someone, but what you can give to them. You showed me that true success isn't about building an empire, but about building a life that matters. I promise to love you, support your dreams, and work beside you to make the world a little bit better every day." Rochelle's vows were equally heartfelt. "Antonio, you gave me back my faith and love when I thought that chapter of my life was over. You saw possibilities in me that I had forgotten existed. You never tried to change who I was, but you helped me become the best version of myself. I promise to love you, challenge you when you need it, and stand by your side as we build something beautiful together." As they exchanged rings, Giuseppe wiped away tears openly, and even some of the usually reserved board members were dabbing at their eyes with tissues. "You may kiss your bride," Father Michael announced with a warm smile. The kiss that followed was gentle, joyful, and full of promise for their future together. As their friends and family cheered, Antonio and Rochelle held each other close, knowing that this was just the beginning of their real adventure together. The reception was held at Giuseppe's restaurant, which had been decorated with simple white flowers and twinkling lights. Instead of a formal sit-down dinner, Giuseppe had prepared a family-style Italian feast with all of Antonio and Rochelle's favorite dishes. The atmosphere was warm, relaxed, and filled with genuine celebration. "I want to make a toast," said Marcus, Rochelle's eldest son, standing up with his wine glass. "Most of you know that my mom raised 3 kids on her own while working multiple jobs. She taught us that love is an action, not just a feeling. She showed us how to work hard, treat people with dignity, and never give up on our dreams." He looked at Antonio with a smile. "When she told us she was getting married again, we were protective. Our mom deserves the best, and we weren't sure anyone could measure up to what she deserves. But watching you two together, seeing how happy you make each other and how you're using your resources to help families like ours, we know that Mom found someone who understands her real value." The toast brought more tears and warm applause, and Antonio felt deeply moved to be accepted so completely by Rochelle's children. They had been skeptical of him at first, worried that he might be another wealthy man looking for a trophy wife. But over the months of getting to know him, they had seen how genuinely he loved their mother and how committed he was to building a life based on shared values rather than financial convenience. As the evening wound down, Antonio and Rochelle found themselves standing on Giuseppe's small back patio, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's lights. "Are you happy?" Antonio asked, wrapping his arms around his new wife from behind. "I'm more than happy," Rochelle said, leaning back against his chest. "I'm content. I'm excited. I'm grateful. I'm about a dozen different wonderful things all at once." "What are you most excited about?" "Tomorrow," Rochelle said without hesitation. "Waking up married to you and starting our real life together. Working on the foundation. Maybe traveling to some of those places where we want to set up educational programs. Growing old together and seeing what kind of legacy we can build." "I love that you said tomorrow," Antonio said, kissing the top of her head. "Not some distant future dream, but literally tomorrow." "That's because happiness isn't something that happens to you," Rochelle said. "It's something you create every day by the choices you make and the love you give." 2 years later, the Rossetti Education Foundation had grown into one of the most respected educational nonprofits in the country. They had provided scholarships to over 300 students, established technology centers in 12 underserved communities, and created mentorship programs that had been replicated by other organizations across the nation. But perhaps more importantly, Antonio and Rochelle had created a marriage that was everything both of their first marriages had lacked. They were true partners who made decisions together, supported each other's individual growth, and never took their love for granted. On a typical Tuesday evening, you might find them in their renovated brownstone in Brooklyn, cooking dinner together while discussing the applications for their newest scholarship program. Antonio had sold his Manhattan penthouse and most of his expensive possessions, choosing instead to live in a neighborhood where they felt connected to the community they served. "Listen to this application," Rochelle would say, reading from her laptop while Antonio stirred the pasta sauce. "This young woman wants to study environmental engineering so she can help communities like hers get access to clean water. She's been working 2 jobs since she was 16 to help support her younger siblings." "That sounds like exactly the kind of student we started this foundation to help," Antonio would reply. "Let's schedule an interview with her next week." Their evenings often included phone calls with scholarship recipients, updating them on program developments, or planning trips to visit their educational centers in other cities. But they also made time for the simple pleasures that had drawn them together. Cooking, reading, taking long walks through their neighborhood, and talking about everything from current events to childhood memories. The greatest surprise, perhaps, was how naturally Antonio had adapted to a life that was bigger than his business success. He had taken on teaching responsibilities at a local community college, where he taught courses on entrepreneurship and business ethics. His students, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to Rochelle's, consistently rated him as their favorite professor. "Professor Rossetti really understands what it's like to struggle," one student evaluation read. "He doesn't just teach us about business theory. He teaches us how to use business skills to make our communities better." On their second wedding anniversary, as they sat in the same Shakespeare garden where they had been married, Antonio reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't knocked on my office door that night?" he asked Rochelle. "Sometimes," she said, squeezing his hand. "But I think we would have found each other somehow. Good people have a way of recognizing each other, even in unexpected circumstances." "I used to think that success meant having everything," Antonio said. "Now I know that success means sharing everything with the right person." "What's our next adventure?" Rochelle asked, looking at the ring that caught the afternoon sunlight. "I was thinking we could expand to international programs," Antonio said. "Maybe start with schools in Italy and Haiti, honoring both of our heritage." "I love that idea," Rochelle said. "Building bridges between our families' histories and the future we're creating together." As they walked home through the park where they had been married, hand in hand like any other couple in love, it was impossible to tell that one of them had once been a billionaire who locked himself away from the world in despair. What you could see was two people who had found their purpose in loving each other and using that love to make the world a little bit brighter for everyone they touched. Behind them, the foundation building stood as a testament to what was possible when broken hearts were mended by genuine kindness, when wealth was used as a tool for justice, and when two people decided that their love story should be about giving rather than taking. And in offices around the city, night shift workers were just beginning their duties, never knowing that their simple acts of human kindness might someday change someone's entire life. Because that's how the best love stories begin, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with one person seeing another person's pain and deciding that nobody should have to suffer alone. Antonio and Rochelle had learned that the greatest gift you can give another person is not money or status or even passion, but the kind of steady, nurturing love that helps them become who they were always meant to be. And in giving that gift to each other, they had discovered that they had everything they had ever really wanted.